The RPF Inkotanyi wants to exterminate all Hutus. Governments of the world, NGOs. Please listen to the voice of the Hutu people who are desperately groaning under the yoke of the totalitarian and bloodthirsty power of the RPF Inkotanyi. Dear governments and NGOs. For more than 30 years now, the Hutu people have been suffering atrocities and summary executions by the RPF Inkotanyi. In the face of the complicit silence or with the complicity of many governments and many non-governmental organizations. Many of them behave this way due to lack of information. Others due to manipulation by the RPF Inkotanyi. Others remain silent out of intimidation. Indeed, the RPF Inkotanyi skillfully handles these deadly weapons that proceed. Accompany and protect its plan to conquer, keep and preserve the power it has conquered by writing history, not with a pen but with a Kalashnikov weapon. Dear governments and NGOs. We feel like we are being unjustly sentenced to death without trial. We feel like the extermination of the Hutu people was decided by a government or an NGO with great power and entrusted this macabre mission to the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF Inkotanyi. The latter has been carrying out its mission excellently since October 1, 1990. RPF Inkotanyi, which calls itself a killing machine, and which has the lion as the symbol of its modus operandi. This RPF Inkotanyi has been exterminating the Hutus since October 1, 1990, without being convicted or judged by any court, government or NGO. It must be said that the Tutsis who did not want to follow its bloody plan have suffered and are still suffering the same fate as the Hutus. To carry out its diabolical plan, the RPF Inkotanyi caused a genocide in Rwanda. The first victims of this genocide were the high authorities of Rwanda and Burundi of the Hutu ethnic group. Witnesses claim that this attack was committed by the RPF Inkotanyi itself, which wanted to cause many massacres to find political reasons to gain power, its obsession. No international investigation has been carried out to refute these witnesses. No one has prevented the RPF Inkotanyi from organizing this investigation. In any case, when a crime is committed, the beneficiary of this crime is normally the first presumed guilty party. No doubt the RPF Inkotanyi is the only beneficiary of this cowardly and ignoble act. No doubt the RPF Inkotanyi is the first presumed guilty party of this attack until proven otherwise, which only an international and free investigation can provide. It is not only the attack on the plane that requires the establishment of an international investigation. The mass killings that followed this attack up to the present day also require an international investigation. The version that was imposed on international opinion is that of the victors who are the RPF Inkotanyi, whose famous main ideologue claims that one could not eat the omelette without having crushed the eggs. This version of the RPF Inkotanyi brandishes its innocence and castigates the guilt of each Hutu, whether alive or dead, whether baby or old. All are considered genocidaires by the RPF Inkotanyi regime. This regime was able to convince international opinion by all means. From now on, the RPF Inkotanyi has received the credentials to hunt down to death all Hutus wherever they are under the sun. When the RPF Inkotanyi massacres Hutu babies, no one reacts at the international level since it says that it is fighting against the genocidaires. Those he massacred before 1994 in the regions he occupied in northern Rwanda also fall into the same bag. This flagrant injustice exercised against the Hutus by the RPF has never spared some Tutsis who want to speak in favor of the Hutus. But the RPF uses the massacre of the Tutsis as a bridge to move to the banks of the massacre of Hutus. The history of the Hutu manhunt, now considered genocidal by the RPF, reached a more intolerable level in the years 1996, 1997, 1998 in the forests of Congo, ex-Zaire. At that time, the RPF hunted down Hutu refugees, children, women and old people alike. The UNHCR and many NGOs and governments supported this extermination. The RPF in Inkotanyi massacred and continues to massacre Hutu refugees in Congo. But it did not spare those who are in Rwanda or in other countries. The RPF in Inkotanyi is an expert in torture. Only God knows the suffering it inflicts on its victims in official prisons, in secret detention centers and in transit centers or houses. Hutus are mortally and continuously tortured in a permanent and systematic way with the blessing of some NGOs and some governments that still support this bloody regime that had never existed since the creation of the world. Indeed, the RPF in Inkotanyi has set up a totalitarian and bloody regime, an apartheid system that puts aside the Hutus, but to deceive the vigilance of governments and NGOs. It incorporates some Hutu puppets into the system after having brainwashed them by configuring them in its killing machine system. Dear governments and NGOs, show that you are not accomplices of this regime by condemning its macabre plan to exterminate the Hutus wherever they are in the world. Organize a free and effective international investigation to determine the mastermind of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Organize an international investigation to determine and judge the responsibility of the RPF in Inkotanyi in the extermination of the Hutus and Tutsis who lived in Rwanda before 1994. We are not naive. We know the truth since we were victims in person. We ask you to recognize this truth and to render justice. We ask you to let justice punish those who were reported by the mapping report and that there be political consequences. Because a leader who massacres his people deserves the sanctions provided for by international justice, and can no longer receive the honors of the red carpet and fanfares. That the UNHCR recognizes the Hutu refugees scattered in African countries and in other countries around the world. It is a scandalous injustice to let these people languish in misery, to force them to return to Rwanda to be tortured and executed. That the word genocidal, too dear to the government of the RPF in Inkotanyi, should no longer be used wrongly and indiscriminately to designate the Hutus. This language is unjust, and those who use it abusively and in bad faith should be denounced and judged. Rhetorically condemning an entire ethnic group as genocidal constitutes a crime that goes beyond even genocide itself. Indeed, who would dare to treat all Germans as genocidal? It is this crime of great manipulation that the RPF in Inkotanyi has committed and is still committing against the Hutus. Unfortunately, many governments and NGOs have fallen into its insidious trap, or are with it in this plot. The time has come to correct the mistakes and bring justice to the Hutus who have been massacred by the RPF in Inkotanyi since 1990, and who are still threatened with extermination by this Tutsi apartheid regime of the RPF in Inkotanyi. Dear governments and NGOs, help. It is urgent. The RPF in Inkotanyi wants to finalize once and for all the extermination of the Hutus that began on October 1, 1990. The RPF in Inkotanyi is exterminating the Hutus and Tutsis who lived in Rwanda before 1994 and their descendants and complete this bloody work. The RPF in Inkotanyi is also killing the Hutus who have taken refuge in other countries. The RPF in Inkotanyi is killing the Hutus who are in their own countries like Congo and Burundi. Please stop this extermination. It is now or never.